Hot. This feels like a hospice meeting.
Yeah, really, this is what it could be like.
Nobody shows up.
Really kind of anticlimactic.
No public. Because I went to one of the meetings one time, and it was just, I think it was Bo and me, and that was it.
Yeah, the board members.
And the board members.
Okay, it works.
Yay! Running. So, hello again, I'm Dana Levac. In case you wondered how to spell that funky name, my mother, I think, couldn't get past the A's in the alphabet, so just a whole bunch of A's and a couple consonants. I am the Northwest Regional Manager for the Department of Local Affairs, and within the Department of Local Affairs, within the Division of Local Government. Northwest Region encompasses Moffat County, Rio Blanco County, Garfield County, Mesa County, Delta County, Gunnison County, and Hinsdale County. Just to name a few. Just to name all of them. So basically, what I do is consult with all of those counties and all of the towns and cities within those counties. And my job is to support the mission of DOLA, which some aren't quite applicable to me, but I'm going to go over them anyway. It includes the equitable, consistent implementation of property tax laws. You'll see there's a whole division for that. Community development that is revitalizing and sustainable. Although they're a separate division, we work very closely with them. Technical and financial support for community development needs. That's actually within the Division of Local Government. Safe, affordable housing. That's also within the Division of Local Government. And emergency preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. While I'm going to touch on that because we never see that again in the presentation. While we will not prepare your emergency operations plans, your continuity of operations plan, not necessarily respond to your emergencies. We're not first responders. We do help in the recovery effort. We're primary within the state on recovery. So as an example, in the Marshall fires, which were up in Superior and Louisville, where 1,000 homes were built, we were up there for about a month and a half. And the 8 regional managers rotated in and out, and we helped with the Disaster Assistance Center. So we help coordinate, make sure that all the nonprofits are in there, the insurance companies, housing people, and we coordinate to make sure that you're getting the assistance you need to help your town recover from whatever disasters you may encounter. Right.
Oh dear.
Okay. So again, within our divisions within DOLA, there's the Board of Assessment Appeals. The assessment appeals is if somebody says, hey, you're taxing me at the wrong rates, you're not using the right valuations on my home or something else. The normal route for that kind of a controversy would be to the courts. However, that happens so often, they eliminate the courts and there's a Board of Assessment Appeals that those kind of things go to if they get out of the county. There's the Division of Housing. The Division of Housing is becoming much, much more important than it ever was before. There's a lot of housing money coming down. It's a priority both at the federal and state level, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward. The Division of Local Government is actually where I'm kind of in. A lot of technical assistance, a lot of financial assistance, demographic analysis. We are kind of the boots on the ground, where the road meets the road, so to speak, on local government. And then there's a division of property taxation. No, they don't come in and tax your property. They work with county assessors, they work with citizens, they work on issues like Tabor restrictions to make sure the right kind of valuations are being applied to certain types of property. So if there's a large, one of the ongoing controversies, as an example, is industrial agriculture, where they're actually growing agriculture inside of buildings. And there's an argument at the state, is that industrial commercial or is it agriculture? Clearly 2 different rates. So the Division of Property Taxation works jurisdictions through those kind of issues to try to get resolution. The Division of Local Government, again, is where I'm at. I'm part of the field team. The field team is really 12 people, and we cover the whole state. There's 8 regional managers, and then there's 4 regional assistants. Each regional assistant helps 2 regional managers. But then we have financial assistants. The financial assistants are really the people who kind of run our grant programs. They're not, giving out school loans, that kind of financial assistance, but they're running the programs. The demographer's office is the state demographer's office. If we continue to be invited to help you guys with some of the tentative processes we have planned. The next one will be, one of the first introductions will be from the state demographer's office. And what they do is they track the trends in population, trends in employment, trends in income level, trends in anything and everything that's coming out of your town, your county, the region, the state, compared to the national levels. So they can look at trends and do trend analysis and give you the information you need to figure out what direction is our town heading? Is it heading in the right direction, the wrong direction? Really helps you get into that strategic planning, which hopefully will be at one of our last sessions. There's also community development that we talked about. And again, technical assistance. A lot of the technical assistance, their people will actually be coming into our budgeting training session. They're the ones that deal with all the audits. Your audit gets turned into the state. They come down and they look at how's your finances, are all the things you're doing correct. They'll come out and do budget training. They do special districts. They really provide that high-level technical assistance. Community Development Office runs the Main Street program. That's different than the CDOT Main Street program, but they really work on downtown redevelopment focus. So a lot of the work you see in Delta was done through the Main Street program. A lot of things you might see in Lake City were done through the Main Street program. A lot of things up in Beaker and Rangeley were done through the Main Street program. How about Cedar Ridge? Cedar Ridge applied through the Main Street program, but didn't get it last time. But they do work with the program. So local government services, local government files, public records, budgeting, finance, Tabor issues, special district elections, directors. A lot of issues with special districts. You don't even want to think about. Special districts have a lot of turnover. I know you guys have experienced turnover. It actually looks fairly minor compared to what special districts have. And then they have a whole bunch of special rules that relate to them, how they fill vacancies. And then the research and applied fiscal analysis is, again, just top notch. You couldn't pay some of the big analytical firms to do the kind of work that the fire department does. As an example of the kind of files they keep records for over 30, almost 3,500 local governments just in the state of Colorado. If there's a district, they keep the records. Cemetery districts, hospital districts, nuisance abatement districts, water districts, irrigation districts, regular government, city government, county governments, statutory governments, incorporated governments, constitutional governments. It's mind-boggling what they have. You can find this page on our website, and you'll see, I don't think it doesn't show up on that. There's these tabs, and you can find any local government, any special district. Once you actually get to the governments in the special district, there's additional tabs. You can look at summary information, budget information. Everybody's got to turn their budget into DOLA. You can go look at every other jurisdiction's budget. You can go see what other towns are doing with their budgets, how they're doing it. Their financial information about higher level finance information than purely down in the budget. Director information, their elections, maps, boundaries, their organization, plans, contacts, filings, lots and lots of information there, particularly on other city, town, county governments. They're the ones that generally are doing the best job in filing, not so much with special districts. Yes.
Do you by any chance have a link to their home pages with each of these governments when you go into there? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great place to start if you want to find out anything about any other government in the state. So the State Demography Office, again, I'm not going to go through all of this, but they work with everybody. You know, they're all at Cdbg, Department of Homeland Security, CDOT, DOC. They get data from everybody anywhere in the state and use that to compile that kind of demographic analysis. And this is the field services. Those are the 8 regions. We're in the nice blue region up on the north. Kind of see I get to go pretty much from Wyoming down to New Mexico. So that's great. The financial assistance now, this is where we start talking about how do we get money down to the local level. it's interesting. One of the most abused and laughed at lines is, "Hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help."
Yeah.
With DOLA, it's actually true. We're not going to come down and tell you what to do, tell you how to do something. We just want to come down and find out what it is you want to do. We may raise issues, cause you to think a little more about things you might not have thought about. But at the end of the day, those decisions are yours. You run the town. You're the elected board. And our job is to try to help find ways so you can get the things done that you want to get done. So these are some of the sources we have. We have both competitive and pass-through funding. So some pass-through funding, that's basically money that we get. It may be from the federal government, it may be from the state government, that they basically say, give this out to people and just give it out on a formula basis. A good example of that is the state severance tax. There used to be a day when I think Paonia got some pretty good money from the severance tax. Unfortunately, now I think it's down to like $1.30 or something. It's very small. But there are things, there's other things, conservation trust, things like that come down purely on a formulaic basis, and those pass through DOLA. And then there are competitive grants. Our energy and mineral impact, also known as EIAF, is probably the biggest, most popular grant fund. Back in the heyday, we used to have 3 cycles of $20 million apiece. So we had $60 million of funding that people could apply for. And they came in tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 were smaller level grants. Tier 2 were big grants. Right now, tier 1 is up to 200,000. Tier 2 is up to 750,000. Those kind of grants, and I think I'm going to get to it again, so I'm not going to get too much in depth. If I miss it, remind me, I'll come back and talk about it. Cdbg grants, predominantly going to disadvantaged communities. We're working on spotlight, and we have Cdbg public services and Cdbg public facilities. The public services were really as a result of coronavirus. They really went to helping people either recoup from coronavirus or plan how to deal with another pandemic in the future. Conservation Trust Fund, again, kind of is a pass-through. Rural Economic Development Initiative, also known as READY grants. Popular, they're going to be funded again. It's an opportunity for a jurisdiction to come in and say, you know, we have some ideas how we can drive the economy in our local jurisdiction. And they can bring those forward through a grant application, and we fund not all of them, but a good portion of it. Ideas, the one that always keeps coming to mind is Gunnison came in, they wanted to run a city of Gunnison, a pilot project. They asked for $500,000. We cut it down to $250,000. What they wanted to do was be able to give out incentives to businesses to come to the city of Gunnison. We said, no, we're not going to let you recruit businesses because you could be stealing from another city. We don't do that. We don't cannibalize each other in the state of Colorado, at least we shouldn't, right? But we said, you know what, we'll give you less as long as you use it to grow your local businesses. So if you have a local business and they have an idea and they want to expand, okay, you know, you screen them, bring them to us, we'll be the final sign off, but if it's good, it's good. They just had their first series of things come in. They had things like a local tortilla manufacturer who was only in Gunnison wanted to buy a bigger tortilla making machine so they could expand to Crested Butte, Mount Crested Butte, and over the Delta and Montrose. They were going to add 20 jobs. That's a no-brainer. Right? So those are the kind of things that Ready's really trying to do is let's invest back into your community so you can actually see jobs grow. Marijuana impact assistance is, again, it's pretty formulaic, as is gaming impact assistance. HB 21-1271 is a housing grant or program that started last year. There will be the planning grants from that are exhausted. And the planning grants, basically this is what 1271 said. It said, we know that there's a problem having enough housing, particularly affordable housing. People seem to have no problem building houses that are $600,000 and up, but getting those houses in that $200,000 to $300,000 range where people who are low to moderate income can afford, that's a problem. They laid out 16 strategies that a jurisdiction could put into their local building code. Things like lower parking ratios. So instead of having two parking spaces for residents, okay, you can make it 1 if you're in this affordable housing range. or putting accessory dwelling units on single unit properties. There were 16 strategies like that. The planning grants were basically given out for a jurisdiction to look at their code and look at how or if they wanted to incorporate some of those strategies. The next round are incentive grants. The incentive grants are grants that we're giving out to jurisdictions who want to incentivize actual building of affordable housing. So as an example, you have a developer who comes in, there's a nice piece of property, edge of town, 5 acres, they want to put 36 units on. But normally they'd have to build 1,200 feet of 36-inch sewer pipe to connect, and that cost is going to kill them, and it's going to drive the cost up so that the average cost of a unit is not within that 80 to 120% of the adjustable median income. The incentive grant can be used to basically offset that cost. So the local government builds it, but with state money. So it doesn't cost the local government, and incentivize that developer by driving his cost down. That's just an example. The next round of those will be coming out this fall, but in order to qualify for those, you have to already have at least 3 of those strategies in your building codes. Well, technically now that's the end of that program. This last legislative session, they just dumped hundreds of millions, maybe about 100 million back into housing programs. So the scuttlebutt, even though legislative session is over, the legislature very rarely says this is exactly how we want the program done. They just say, DOLA is going to figure it out, and they give us the money. The scuttlebutt is it'll be to reinstitute the 1271 program going forward because it was very successful this last round.
That's the Eiaf grant that we applied for, or tried to apply for that we're go for. So
Eiaf is the planning, IHOI is the so federal, the mineral impact, this talks about it. This talks about the intent. The intent is a little watered down. The true intent of the mineral impact grant was to take the money that oil and gas and mineral producers were giving to the state in taxes and inject it back into the communities that were most impacted. If you look at where that money's coming from in terms of the state, huge chunk of it from Weld County, huge chunk. But there's not a lot of folks in Weld County, so it's not as impacted. And also a huge chunk coming from Garfield. Those are the top 2 counties. So really it's been watered down a little bit. That money's spread a little more out, even to include some communities that aren't as directly impacted by energy and minerals. To be eligible, you have to be a municipality. We've had nonprofits call us. And it's like, no, we don't do nonprofits. We don't do private enterprises. This is just talking about what's going on. Sorry for the typo. There is no May 125. It was late last night.
I never make that date.
So this cycle actually started earlier in the year. The applications came in. The hearings are actually being held next week on the Tier 2 applications. Tier 1 applications are reviewed administratively, basically by the regional managers. We beat the hell out of, excuse me, we beat each other up really good.
You're worse than that.
we beat each other up really good and pick the programs apart, and then we grade them in terms of which ones are going to have the most impact on the community, because we really want to fund programs that are going to really help change and transform the community. Those go up to the executive director, and they're ultimately presented administratively to the Energy Advisory Committee, which goes through and generally agrees, but they may have some questions and may change some priorities. But then those are rewarded administratively. The Tier 2, which are the 750,000, they actually go to hearing. So in Golden next week, each one of the applicants will appear either remotely or in person before that committee, present in 7 minutes the whole basis for their application, why they should get money. And then at the end of the day, the committee will rank and make recommendations. Community development grants, again, we kind of close that. Right now, there's no Cdbg grants or cycles open, but that's something you should always be thinking about, particularly as a lower median income jurisdiction. Conservation trust is formulaic. It comes in and it just automatically gets distributed based on population and revenue source. Ready, we talked about, no question, you are a prime ready community if you can come up with a project. One of the things I just want to caution at this point, this is just the head of the needle, or the head of the pin, I guess, in terms of what's really available there in money. One of the common issues that a jurisdiction runs into is chasing the money. There's money, let's go do this. It's a surefire way to end up in disaster. Rather than saying, oh, there's money, let's go get the money so we can do this. If you figure out what you want to do, and then we'll work with you to find the money to do it. If you got the plan, then we find a way to do the plan. But if you're just chasing money, you end up doing all these different things. And then, 2 years down the line, you find out you missed what you really need to do. So I just caution you that that's something we're always kind of living at, making sure that we're working with you to do the right things. And Ready, we also do planning grants. How can we plan to build your economy and infrastructure? Again, if I have a jurisdiction that has an old loop road that was built as basically a business park. It had some early success. Those businesses have stayed, but the road is so deteriorated that at this point, nobody will come. They can come forward to Ready and say, hey, look, help us fix this infrastructure, because if you do, we got these businesses ready to come in. That's a good purpose for Ready grants for infrastructure. 1271 we talked about. I'm not going to deal a whole bunch with it, except to say, there was 46 million before there was infrastructure money. So that money is becoming attractive. Technical assistance, again, this is kind of what I do. This is what Demography does. This is what financial folks do. We're here to offer technical assistance. And I guess I should have started by saying a little of my background. I've been a deputy district attorney, an assistant district attorney, a chief public defender, a deputy county manager, a finance director, a budget manager, a city manager, a court administrator for the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, and the development services administrator for the city of Las Vegas, Nevada. So I've done all this stuff in government. And that's what every one of my peers, the other regional managers, are like. We hire people with broad backgrounds that they say we're an inch deep and a mile wide. We know a whole bunch of stuff, a little bit about it. But we know where to point you and where to move people to get the resources we need to put things together. So we'll talk about, alternative financing mechanisms. I love the adage, I love to spend other people's money. So if there's an opportunity and you need to do something, somebody's willing to give you money for it, do it. And that's what I like to do for my jurisdiction. And we've been very successful. We had almost 30 applications this last cycle for grants, and it was way more than anybody else. So I'm pretty aggressive about trying to help my jurisdictions get money for stuff they need to do. We definitely talk about land use, capital planning, budgeting, financial management, legal, ethical issues, and strategic planning. And again, we'll get to that a little bit later. We do elected official training. We're going to get to this stuff in a little bit after this initial DOLA thing. And then we talk about the local government training, visioning and strategic planning. There's an old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there. And it's really important. Again, back to the point of don't chase the money unless you have a project you need to do with the money. Strategic visioning is really about coming together, not just as a board, not just as a staff, but as a community, and saying, what do we want our community to look like? At this point, I would use 2040. What should it really look like? That's absolutely your choice. Our obligation is to give you that background information so you can kind of see where you've been, where you're moving to, And you can decide, you continue to move in one direction, another direction, stay where you are, go back. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. There's certain core things that always matter. Public safety, health, water, water treatment, wastewater treatment. Those are key. Other than that, you can do what you want with your town. You know, pave the streets in gold. That's up to you. Questions to this point? I can't talk for 3 hours.
I'm trying to differentiate in my own mind about what's most appropriate for us, because I feel in looking at your outline, we were talking about strategic planning, but if you could go back to the last slide, please. That capital planning and budgeting is much bigger in my mind than strategic planning. And the reason for that is we have really good data now from JDS Hydro, SGM, a number of studies that were on water stuff that gives us like an outline of what we need to do and what things are really horrible that we need to fix. And getting a plan together to get us, okay, this year we're going to get these red line things done. And then next year, maybe the yellow lines can get done. But getting clear about that. And maybe I'm a little jaundiced on strategic planning because a lot of it I did as a consultant before, you know, and it a lot of times collects dust. People forget about it. They don't implement it well. And when you have capital planning and budgeting, you're going, here's the project money this year, here's the project next year. It doesn't collect as much dust.
What he said.
I can agree with you to a point.
Yeah.
I think good strategic planning, I like to think I do good strategic planning.
Yeah.
You'll tell me at the end of a few months from now. It looks at the picture as a whole. So yes, you have water needs. Yes, you have wastewater needs. And I work with Desi, I work with the SGM folks, and we're talking all the time. So I'm aware of what you got going on. But how does that fit in the bigger picture? Is it just to fix the system you have, or is it to upgrade the system you have? Where are you at in terms of growth? Where do you see the city growing? Are there plans to annex, not annex? Are you going to change the kind of businesses you bring into town? As an example, if you want to have brew pubs in town, that changes your waste flow. And it may change some, not all. The big picture that you've got these capital needs is still going to be there, but it could tweak it one way or the other. And what I always say is, if you don't know where you're going, stop. Because the next step you take may take you in the wrong direction. If you know where you're going, then you can look and say, okay, we're heading in the right direction. Great, that's the time to do it. But you got to have that bigger picture of what's that town going to look like? What do you want? What kind of businesses? What kind of growth? What kind of residences? Are you looking at apartment buildings? No, we never want apartment buildings. You see yourself having a Costco at some time? Nah, we don't want to do that. Do you want to do some of those ag businesses with the large greenhouses, indoor agriculture thing? I don't know. During our strategic plan, we're going to ask those kind of questions. And a lot of them will be predicated upon what the demographer's office is telling you. This is where you were, this is where you're heading. These are the national, the statewide, and regional trends. You'll get to make those decisions. Those decisions may never impact anything you already know about SGM. But at least if that's your decision, you'll know that the next step is taking in the right direction.
So when you're doing strategic planning, how often are you looking at water availability in terms of growth?
I'm just going to throw that back. As we do strategic planning, how often are you going to look at it?
Well, I'm asking you because I understand you may be doing our strategic planning, and I feel like we're in a very unique position that we have a water moratorium going on, and it's not ready to be lifted anytime soon. And we have lots of questions associated with our infrastructure and our water sources, which we have learned is one of the most complicated in the country.
Sure.
So mostly I feel like we're in a slightly different situation than maybe other places that their water system is much simpler and not prone to the vagaries of our system.
You certainly have to have those questions answered. Am I going to bring my relative lack of expertise on those questions to give you the answer? No. We're going to pull the reports. We're going to look at the reports. You've got staff people, we'll even bring the consultants if we need to, talk about those kind of issues. If you're saying, we want to have a brewery row, the question goes, can the water supply support that? Can the treatment plant support that? If it can't, then your question is, okay, do we give up on the brewery row? And please, this isn't me saying do a brewery row. Do we give up on doing the brewery row and move forward in this direction with the treatment plants? Or do we still move towards a brewery row as an income source and modify our treatment plant plans? So yes, those questions have to be addressed. I can tell you as an example, we're working with the town of Crawford. So Crawford, their peak demand on their system is getting close to their peak capacity to deliver. So you have a peak demand when? Heat of the summer. You're going to have a fire when? Heat of the summer. Your peak demand, you're barely delivering, and then you have a fire. You got a problem. You can't put out a fire. So we're working with them to say, okay, we need to build additional storage, we need to build additional capacity, because that's just a basic need they have. So yes, we look at that whole plethora of the issues that your town will be. And my job isn't to answer them for you, right? It's to ask the questions, just like you did. So when we get to that strategic planning, asking those questions is important, but asking those questions with an open mind that I really want to know the answer. Just give me the answer one way or the other. And it can't be, this is what I think. We rely on experts. We're bringing those consultants to say, this is the fact. Okay, how can we solve this? Can we move this direction or this direction? Maybe what the town needs to do is simplify its water system. I don't know. I haven't read the reports. Clearly something needs to be addressed, no question. Right.
And I also think the one piece that we haven't gotten is we haven't gotten general public input. We don't have the citizens in a process where they can say, this is where we want to see the town go. These are the needs that we see the town to meet. Sure, we have water problems, but here are other problems. How can we mesh the two? And without that citizen input, I think we're flying blind, and we really need to get that.
Yeah, you have a great advantage being the size town you are, that you'll be able to, I hope, get a fairly good representation across the town of the citizen and residents. And getting their input should help drive your decisions. They don't make up the strategic plan. They elected you to do that. But I know it can be difficult. We'll get to one thing in here. You guys are all volunteers. Some of you may have other jobs. You may have grandchildren. You may have spouses, other responsibilities in life. So it's not like you're in a big city councilman when you're getting paid $120,000 a year and you get to have meetings and coffee every day, all day long. You get to meet somebody at the grocery store, a local restaurant or food stand. This is an opportunity for them to come and give their input to you. So it's a tremendous advantage. I'm really looking forward to it.
Can I ask one more question? That is, how much does the master plan influence strategic planning?
At this point, none. At this point, none.
We don't, ours is from 1996.
When you finish the strategic plan, go back and look at that master plan. Does this really fit? We're planning this, but now we're saying this is where we want to be in 2040. We need to tweak this. And we have grants for that. All right, so you're on a board. And I got to watch the presentation that Sam Light did for you last week before. So I'm going to try to not belabor points he's already gone through. These are things that you should have learned. If there's something that you don't feel he covered deeply enough or absolutely wasn't covered, just stop me. I'll be happy to discuss it. Board staff roles, responsibilities, we'll get more into that. Policies and procedures for good board staff interaction. I'll just pause. One of the things that really hurt the town is a dysfunctional board that argues with citizens, argues with itself, argues with staff. It kind of undermines the public trust in the validity of the government. Are they really doing business or are they just churning their wheels? When it comes time to recruit, When you're recruiting true professionals, they go back and they look at your city council meetings, board meetings, and they look to see, is this the kind of place I want to work? When your staff is here and not just Corinne or Cindy, but other staff members, if they're feeling antagonism between the board and their leadership staff, they feel tense, they feel insecure. And they start at first passively looking for other opportunities, other things they can do that might be a little more secure, a little more safe, a little more comforting. And then they start doing the more aggressive search, and they start sending out resumes, aggressively looking, and you start experiencing turnover. So one of the things that I say every single time, one of the most important things you can do is understand the roles, responsibilities, and how to have good relationships between each other and with your staff and with the citizens. And we'll talk about that a few more times. The board's role in creating and legislating policy, the distinction between policy and administration, extremely important. I know Sam touched on it, and I told you I was a district attorney, so I am a licensed attorney. I'm licensed in Colorado and Arizona. I'm inactive. None of this is meant as legal advice. But the thing you should love is the Governmental Immunity Act. You're safe. Act in your role. You can make good decisions or bad decisions. Doesn't matter. You're immune. Nobody can sue you because you granted a liquor license or denied a liquor license, as long as you're doing it within the parameters of what you're supposed to be doing. When you step outside of that role, and traditionally where I see electeds get in trouble is when they get into personnel issues. When an elected starts talking to a city administrator, town administrator about, I don't like so-and-so, they're taking too long of breaks, they're doing this, you need to fire them, you need to do something. And the person ultimately gets terminated. That board member has opened themselves up to liability because you've stepped outside of your role and started interfering with things that are really on the administration side. I caution you, particularly against dealing with personnel matters, other than the people who you directly supervise as a board. All right. You should obviously know the issue-specific information, major issues facing the board, ethics, policies, and expectations. We'll touch on them briefly. I know Sam did. Liabilities, we talked about. Unwritten rules. Well, how do you get to know the unwritten rules? They're constantly changing. I thought at one point Sam was, going to touch on this. He talked about procedural fairness. I talked about it in terms of procedural justice. Procedural justice means somebody comes before you or interacts with you in a given situation. They have a right to believe that they are going to be treated under the similar set of rules that other people have been before you. It's that inconsistency that undermines public confidence. So, those unwritten rules shouldn't be unwritten. They should be rules. They should be policies. Those are the things that the public can look up. You can look up as a board member, staff can look up on their part and say, these are the expectations and responsibilities that are on us and how we deal with other people, how we deal with the way we do business. And they can be held accountable both ways, up and down. Preferred methods of communication between staff and board, you define that, really. Again, the only thing I talk about is it's not yelling and screaming. It's not snide. It's not mean. I know that for instance, you have a set of rules. I think it's in a policy. It talks about shall address staff by titles. People should address the board by title. In a lot of the jurisdiction I've worked in, it's literally to the point, if I want to talk to Trustee Valentine, it's Madam Mayor, through you, Trustee Valentine, because every communication goes through the mayor. The mayor is the board. And so you can't really talk to a single trustee. You have to go through the mayor and then up down to the trustee. Whether you do that or not, that's up to you. But if you've got rules, follow them. It's really that simple. Otherwise, what happens is you have I'll use a citizen who comes in and they're talking about something and you're behaving in this fairly congenial manner, but that citizen gets upset and starts, jawing at you, and you're going to say, I'm not Dave, I'm Mayor Pro Tem Knudsen. Well, wait a minute, you just changed the rules in the middle of the game. If you've got rules, enforce the rules from the very beginning of the game, just like you'd expect to see in a football game or a baseball game or a soccer game. The rules should be consistent throughout the game. All right, chain of command, budget process, capital planning process. We'll get into that, how to acquire the information you need. I did hear an interesting exchange with Sam about can and I don't know who did it, so I'm not even going to look who said it. Can a trustee file a quorum request for information from town staff? And I think Sam's advice was right on the nose. Yes, technically you can. Any citizen can. But you have to ask yourself the deeper question. If I have to do that to get information, where has our system failed? Our system shouldn't be failing there. There's a breach. There's something wrong in the fundamental communication that's going on. Maybe, and I'm not going to tell you how to do things, but maybe that's a thing where you say, you know what, if we need something from staff, let's send it to the mayor. Mayor, please get the information from staff. And you have one central point. I don't know. That's really up to you, but there's got to be consistency again in that communication. On that regard, one thing I will always tell town administrators, town managers, and boards, if one board member asks for information, it goes to all board members. So no board member should expect that if you ask something of staff or you ask something of another board member, that only you have that information. That's not fair. That's not open. It's not transparent, really, even though you may have gotten the information by drop into the town administrator's office. Everybody should know that information. All right. Questions?
There's a lot to that.
Yeah.
There is. And literally, that's the kind of thing that there's a gentleman we work with by the name of Greg Philbin, and he was just working with I was just in Frisco on just that single issue, communication. How do you do that? How do you get information? How do we work as a board and as a staff together? That's a whole, we do a retreat just on that issue. The reality is, in my opinion, and the research and things that I've seen, it's all about open communication without agendas. If you come into a communication and you have a preset agenda that, well, I'm going to ask this, but it's not really what I want. I just want to see if they'll give me this or if they'll give that, or I want to find information to undermine another trustee or to undermine staff. That's where people start to not trust and they're hesitant to give back communication. If you're open, sincere, honest about why you want information, I haven't seen issues where people are openly defiant to share information. It's just not in anybody's interest. A staff member or town administrator who deliberately withholds information because they're afraid of doing it is going to end up in trouble at one point or another. Even if it's bad information, we get it. One thing you'll find about me is you may not like everything I say, but I'm going to be candid. I'm going to be honest, and you're always going to find it. I had 2 jurisdictions that submitted grant applications that after I read the applications and saw everything else they were up against, I said, you need to withdraw your application. It's not viable. You're going to waste your time, spin your wheels, and set a bad taste in that committee's mouth that you came forward with a project that really wasn't good. They didn't like to hear that, but I'd rather they hear that from me than they hear it from the committee. So that's kind of my job. So elements to consider. Leadership. You guys are leaders, whether you like it or not. You can't take a passive role. You can't expect somebody else to lead. You are the voice of the town. Collectively, you made that choice, and here you are. Change is never easy. at any level for anything. But staying static and not moving usually isn't good either. So don't be afraid of change. Just be cautious of too much change too quickly or for the wrong reasons. The big picture is one, and this kind of goes back to your question on, well, why don't we do capital planning first? You got to have that big picture. Too many times I've seen board members or commission members or council members come in and they ran on one issue. The issue, I'm going to make sure that we increase the fines for dog owners that don't pick up the dog poop in the park. That's the only issue they got. That's the only thing they ever focus on. They don't know anything about infrastructure, aging pipes, personnel rules, retirement funds, risk management, nothing. And when that one issue either goes against them or for them, they're just kind of done. I encourage you, don't have that. Always be looking at the bigger picture. Government is complex. One of the best things I ever heard is our founders made government hard. It's hard to get anything done in government. And citizens are always saying, well, it should be easier. Problem is, if it's easier and you get a corrupt government in place, then it runs over you. So we have all these checks and balances in place so that when something actually happens, there should have been a whole lot of eyes and a whole lot of people with a whole bunch of different voices looking at it, and it's a safer system. That was the intent. All right. Mandated. This is so big. This agree to disagree, but don't undermine the decision of the board or council. There's very few unanimous decisions in government. You have 7 total, but you only vote in a tie. So you'll have a lot of 6-2s. 6-2s, 4-2s, 4-2s, and some 5-1s, and occasionally a 3-3 where the mayor has to break the tie. Everybody on this board has to be committed, regardless of whether on the winning or the losing side. It is now the decision of the town. That's it. If you undermine that, you're undermining yourself. You're telling the citizens, don't listen, keep fighting. Government doesn't work. Government does work. You came here as an elected legislative body, an executive body, and you listened to arguments, you listened to staff, expert input, you debated among yourselves, and you came to a decision. That is the decision of the town. It's critical that everybody gets on board with that. And if there's any disagreements about it, you do it behind closed doors, one-on-one, but you don't go out in public and undermine each other and call somebody stupid. Run to the press and say, oh, it's the wrong thing. We shouldn't have done that. It is what it is. That's the direction we're going as a town. We're going to do the best with it. Information analysis, you're going to get a lot of stuff. Again, all government is complex. One of the biggest things I can talk about is you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You've got Colorado Municipal League. Your town administrator should be a member of CCMA, the Colorado City County Managers Association. You've got National League of Cities. You've got consultants you hire. You've got DOLA. You've got the State Demographer's Office. You've got Delta County. You've got Hotchkiss. You've got towns all around you that have been through the things you've been through. Don't reinvent the wheel. The best thing you can do is stay current on professional publications, particularly with CML and National League of Cities. You're going to learn what your peers are doing, how they're facing the problems that you're facing, and how they've gotten through them. Last one is interesting. The right decision isn't necessarily the popular, and sometimes the popular decision isn't the right one. So you've got to be willing to make unpopular decisions. Just don't ever be willing to make the wrong decision. Ethics. We'll touch back on ethics in a bit, but the biggest thing I have seen that gets people in trouble, they come in with an agenda. Gosh, I own this piece of property and it would be a great piece for me to recruit this business in, but I got to get it rezoned. That board keeps putting up and they won't rezone it. I'm going to get on the board and rezone it. You can't do it. You can't get elected to further your own goals or the goals of your friends or to get people employed. Quick personal story. I had a very, very competent, good friend. He worked for me for a while and then he moved to another thing. We became friends while he was working for me. Then afterward, I moved to another jurisdiction. He wanted a job. And I said, I can't employ him. But I'm qualified. I said, dude, you are phenomenally qualified. You are the best qualified candidate. But you'll never have credibility. And I'll lose all my credibility. Because people will learn you are my friend. And regardless of how well qualified you are, they will view it as nepotism, that you only got the job because you knew me, and I'm a crony because I'm just hiring my friends. That's not good for either of us. And that's incredibly, incredibly important, particularly in a small town. And again, back to that reason why it's really good to stay out of personnel issues. Code of conduct, respect each other, work as a team, confidentiality. One of the things I heard that my initial reaction when I heard it at the meeting that you had the other day, well, that was a request for all emails to just be immediately public. And I am pretty confident the requester, and again, I don't know who it was, didn't really mean exactly what they were saying, but it just sent this chill up my spine about, oh my God, what happens when you send an email to your attorney about advice on a matter, or you're negotiating over a contract, or you're dealing with an employee health issue on an FMLA approval or something like that. There's stuff that has to be confidential in government. I'm sorry?
I said, if it were to happen, it wouldn't have those things because they're against the law to share.
Well, right.
Attorney-client, you can't do that. I mean, you can have a policy where you share the emails. I didn't bring it up, I don't think, but I do think we need, but of course, you have sidebars you can't go past.
Yeah, it was the sense that the question inferred immediate, like just let somebody have read access to all my emails. It's like, there's got to be a process in place. So anyhow, there are things that you will deal with as a board that require confidentiality, and it can be simple things. Somebody comes in for a rezone, and it's not before you yet as a quasi-judicial body, but then from their rezone that they want to bring some sort of a business in. That may have impact on somebody else in town, and until that becomes public information, you got to keep that somewhat quiet, or a business is coming in, and if they do, it could drive up property rates around it. So let's just be very careful and make sure you keep things confidential. One of the things that I learned sometimes the hard way is the best advice is the board should never be surprised. Never be surprised. There should be good communication up to you on an ongoing basis, whether it's through reports, whether it's through drop-in visits. You should pretty much know what's going on. It's when you're surprised out of the blue, and that sometimes does happen because it's 10 minutes before a meeting happens. But generally speaking, there just shouldn't be any surprises. And it goes the other way. There shouldn't be big surprises at a board meeting that are kind of the gotcha moments for staff. It shouldn't happen. Nobody should be embarrassed at a board meeting, and not just the board, not just staff, but also the public. Consistently, we've talked about the one thing I would add that is you can't be everything to everyone. How many of you have known politicians that promised everybody they'll get exactly what they want, even when two people are asking for the exact opposite thing? You just can't do it. Involvement. Again, I don't know your individual backgrounds, but this is hard work. A lot of people think you get elected, you show up to meetings twice a month. That's kind of it, but it's a lot more than that. And again, my big emphasis for you is stay current on all that information, particularly from CML and NLC. Resources we talked about. The board roles, remember, you represent everybody, not special interests. Don't use the board for your personal advantage or that for your friends. Information is confidential. Approach board issues with an open mind. It can be difficult. Sometimes a member of the public comes to you with information. And based on that information, you say, well, it seems like I'm going to vote this way when I get to the board. One of the first things I say is if you've got that information, when you get to the board, you should disclose that information. Otherwise, it's kind of an ex parte communication. Everybody's entitled to know the same information. And to be open. Maybe that person's not right. Maybe they're mistaken. Maybe they got bad information. So always try to come to board meetings with an open mind. Don't violate the trust of your fellow board members. Again, focus your efforts on the agency, but really the mission of the town. And remember that you as individuals have no power, none. As a board is how you act. Board versus manager and staff roles. You guys are the policymakers. You guys are the ones that say this is how we kind of want the town to function, how we want the overriding attitude to be, the direction we want it to go. And then the administrator has to put your direction into day-to-day practice and manage the affairs of the town. You actually have a code that says, hey, this is what the town manager does, town administrator does. And to me, it's pretty broad. At the end of the day, it says, exercise every power possessed by the town, which is not the exercise of legislative or judicial powers. So run the town, do the day-to-day stuff. You've got to, the one thing I'll say, and I've seen this as a fundamental problem between boards and managers, you have to set up the expectations of how you want that manager to perform. The goals, just like you would a normal, how many people have ever had employees, the performance evaluations? You do them. You don't just say, okay, employee, go to work and come back 6 months or a year and say, oh, man, you didn't do anything the way I wanted you to. Because they're going to say, you didn't tell me how you wanted to do anything. So the first step, and particularly since you've got a lot of new folks on the board, is to sit down and define those expectations of your manager and the staff that you supervise. Only then will you have a fair basis to come back later and say, these are the things I think you did well, these are the things I don't think you did well, these are the things you need to work on. Your senior staff will prepare budget recommendations for your consideration. You ultimately adopt budget. Senior staff recruits, hires, terminates, and supervises staff, completes and gives information about the operation, should provide you pros and cons of alternatives of any pending action before the board. Sometimes those are very fact-based. They're purely mathematical. We can do this, and this option costs X, or we can do this option costs Y. Other times they're opinion. And it's purely based on, as my experience in this position, this would appear to be the better, and here's why. But those are anecdotal things. You have a whole lot more leeway in how you view that opinion than you do necessarily factual. Factual is factual. Senior staff serves at the pleasure of the governing board. The one thing I would say, it doesn't serve the town well, much like having a dysfunctional board and council meeting. It doesn't serve well to have board meetings where you're fired. It makes it very difficult to get new people. My recommendation is you deal with those personnel issues and expectations quietly. You can let your expectations know, you do them in executive session. But again, don't berate somebody, criticize their performances in open meetings. That's just is not conducive to the future recruitment. You need to replace an individual. They make policy recommendations. Whatever you decide, that's what they have to do. The roles, again, this is fairly simple. I'm not going to read through all that. I think Sam covered it pretty well, what the board's responsibilities are and what the administrator and senior staff's responsibilities are. I'm just going to re-emphasize that is not a job description. That is not a performance plan. You need to make sure you've got a good job description for your senior staff. You need to make sure you have performance plans in place for your senior staff, so they know what the expectations are. They know how they're going to be evaluated, critiqued. The constraints that you guys have, I don't know, you guys get like $5 from me.
$100 a month for the board member. I get $200.
$100 a month. That doesn't even pay groceries for a week nowadays. So you're basically volunteers. And it's amazing because I watch some of your board meetings and you come in and just get rated. You're a volunteer. And people wonder why there's turnover. I wouldn't volunteer for a place where I was just going to go beat up with a club every 2 weeks. But remember, you have control over that. You set the rules about how the board meetings go. One of the things that has, and this is just my opinion, it's not telling me what to do or not to do, but I have never in 40 years of government service seen a board or a council meeting where there is a call to the public at every single agenda item. Because what I have seen is every single agenda item becomes an argument with the public. Calls to the public, in my experience, there's one at the beginning and there's one at the end. And at the beginning, people can come up and they can address any item on the agenda. That's their opportunity to give input to you for you to consider when that item comes up. You can always call for somebody's opinion if you want more of an explanation, but they do that at the beginning. You then work your way through the agenda. There's then a call to the public at the end for anything they want to talk about that's not on the agenda. They want to talk about the dog food that's not taken apart, bigger fines or something else. And you can say, no, let's put that on a future agenda and talk about it. But your meetings are really derailed and they become very controversial and antagonistic by every single item, engaging in banter. And call to the public is not banter. It's what do you have to say about this issue? It's not to engage and argue. It's very dangerous. And I think you create a lot of problems for yourself when you have your board organized. And as volunteers, I think you guys are doing good. And your tasks and role definitions are vague. Represent the town. Doing what? When we get to strategic planning, maybe we can do it at some point and just ask, why did you become a board member? And my guess is that there's 7 of you all total. There will be 7 different answers. Because you all came for different reasons, for different purposes. You didn't come to get beat up. And you didn't come because there was a job description. You read it and said, oh, I think that would be a fun job. So you really have to kind of work together as a board to say, and it may not be formal, you may not do policy, it may be one of those unwritten rules by the way you behave, the way you treat each other. And this is how we are going to interact with our community, with other communities, with staff. And by setting that as the tone, you kind of define your job for both yourselves and the people who will follow you. And you get feedback once every 2 years or 4 years?
It depends.
So every 2 years, people are going to go to a little box and let you know how you did. But they're not going to tell you which way they said, whether you did good or bad. So you get no real feedback. You don't even know when you go to the grocery store and somebody greets you with a smile. Oh, Dave, it's so nice to see you. Great to see you. You know, I'm glad you voted on that the other week. Yes. You don't know. So you get no feedback. So one of the things that's going to give you the best sense of accomplishment is being a team. Is truly, truly being a team. You know, you look at Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders, great, I mean, I'm sorry, sports thing. Great football player, running back for Detroit Lions. But he was never on a great team. And there's a lot of great players that have just never been part of a great team. And then there's a lot of mediocre players that have been part of a great team. And you look at the satisfaction they have from their careers, and it's way more than those players who have individual achievements. You will get far more satisfaction out of this job by forming that cohesive team. Not saying you all walk in step and vote the same way every time, but you treat each other professionally, courteously, openly, and honestly, and expect the same from the public and treat them the same way. Okay, moving on. Open meetings you talked about with Sam. I'm not going to labor it. Staff constraints. One of the worst things they can have is multiple bosses. You know, if you want a staff member to do something, go to your town administrator, ask for it to get done. Don't go down to a public works person and say, hey, you know, the grass on this park is a little too long, but get it mowed for them. Just don't do it, because all the staff members think they report directly to everyone. They don't. They only report to that person. And if they start doing what you ask them to do, it could be contrary to what John asked them to do, and suddenly you're in controversy. Let the administration handle the administration of the day-to-day resources. Limited resources. Sam touched on this when we talked about the email thing, you know, or the quarterly request. Yeah, you could submit a quarterly request. Let's just say for all the emails. I once had an email for all the emails for 6 judges for a 2-year period. And it was for somebody looking for something, and we knew what they were looking for based on who it was. But we had to scan 86,000 emails. And it took a county attorney and one of my staff members about 15 hours a week for all that time to do that. To weed out little things like, where do you want to go to dinner tonight? Oh, call the doctor because your bunion's hurting. It's just ridiculous. Your staff has 18 staff members, I think was the count I heard. Is that right? 18 people to run the entire business of the city. They are spread thin, very thin. When I come down and I talk with Corinne about, hey, all these grant funding things, oh, we got all this great grant money. I don't even have time to write a grant, much less administer the grant. You talk about a CDBG or a federal grant and all of the restrictions that go on reporting and Davis-Bacon and everything else. There's just, we call it lack of capacity. And it's amazing. The towns that need the money the most have the least capacity to get it and utilize it. And we're trying to fix it. We're trying, but it's not an easy fix. And one of the things that I think is important for a board, particularly in a smaller town, is to recognize those limitations on staff. And don't see every missed communication or missed deadline as bad staff or as malicious behavior on behalf of the staff. See it for what it most likely is. I'm not going to excuse all staff behavior. I'm not referring to any of your staff, but I've certainly seen some bad staff. But give me the benefit of the doubt, because most of the time it's simply they are overworked. Okay. And then again, mixed messages. They hear, oh, the board is agreed and this is the way the town's going, but then they have one board member going out and saying, no, that's wrong. We're going to do something else. Well, step this way. If I do, I'm going to get in trouble. And then what do I do? It's got to be consistent. Once the message comes from this board at a public meeting, that's it. That is the voice. Obstacles in developing a good board staff relationship, and I would even say also in developing a successful board relationship, is not all board members see themselves as members of a team. I'm an individual. I came here just to make sure the dog food got picked up, or else we would put big fines. I don't care about your issue. I don't care about something. I don't care about group homes. I don't care about water systems, whatever. I can drink out of the street. It's an obstacle. If you see it, you guys have to figure out how to overcome that. You guys have to figure out how to bring that person on board. Again, the difficulty in moving on. you just got to move on. There's no magic formula. There's no secret sauce. But if you're on the losing side, you weren't on the losing side. I tell you, I went straight from being the assistant district attorney in the 3rd Judicial District in Trinidad to being the chief public defender in Mojave County, Arizona. And when I was offered that job, I said to my wife, I said, how, if I can do this, I was just locking away bad guys, and now you want me to go over here and do that. And she reminded me, she said, you know what you care about is the system and making sure the system works. And as a prosecutor, you cared about the same thing. If you thought somebody wasn't guilty, you didn't prosecute them. Or if you thought they needed a break, you gave them a break. As a defense attorney, even if you know somebody's like 1,000% guilty, you had to make the system do its job. Because if you didn't, then people who weren't guilty could get convicted. It's the same thing on the board. You're going to put forward arguments and discussions. Sometimes you're going to win, sometimes you're going to lose. But when you lose, you didn't lose. You forced the process to work. You did exactly what the people who elected you to do, to represent them, bring their point of view forward. And just because it was the minority point of view doesn't make it wrong. It just means that's not the decision that the town's going to take. Happens every day. It happens with your kids. Give me a piece of pie. I know you don't get pie. Oh, I lose. It's not the end of the world. You didn't lose. It's just not what you're going to get right now. So getting past it and moving on is so important. And I encourage you, when you have those contentious votes or those close votes, and you think somebody's having a hard time getting past it, don't alienate them. Don't let, if they're on the other side and it got contentious, don't let it drive you apart. You really are part of the same team.
I would just like to point out what you just said, which was the vote. The decisions of the board are only created when there's a vote. So I just want, that's important.
That's correct. Absolutely correct.
Thank you.
And lastly, the board and you guys on the staff don't always speak the same language. It's like, Steve Jobs coming down and trying to talk to me about babysitting. I don't know what he's talking about, probably. You guys talk, your representatives. The staff are the experts. They're the ones that should know all the technical stuff behind what they're doing. You ask people, what do you hear? Staff asks, what do you know? You guys deal in conflict and compromise. Staff deals in cooperation. They have to work together with you to get the things that you want done. You guys, every time you come in here, it's about change. Every time. You have some issue in front of you that needs to be voted on. Maybe staying the same, maybe changing. Most of the time it's changing, it's no matter how it's going to change. Staff loves stability. Stability is security. Security is jobs. Security is paying rent. It's putting groceries on the table, paying for gasoline, and making car payments. You're all here for $100 a month. You're not here for the stability. Apparently, because you've got some lack of stability on the board. So clearly you all know the danger. But staff likes that stability. So again, change is difficult. And be patient and make sure the explanations are good when you ask them to make changes. Basic rules. We talked about this. Do not talk to individual employees. You want to say, hi, how are you doing? How's work? How's the wife? How's the kids? How's the husband? How's the kids? Go ahead. Don't alienate them. You're still people. But don't tell individual employees how to do something. Try to train your citizens to take their complaints directly to your administrator. I am so glad Corinne's not here because I just made her life a whole lot more difficult. But that's her job. Citizens come to you to give you their opinion about policy and how things should be done. But when they have a complaint about how things are run, why isn't this pothole filled? Why is the street sign missing? Why has the street light been out? You're not going to change the street light. You're not going to fix the pothole. It needs to go to, excuse me, a lot of bubbles in here. Very real, sorry. It needs to go to the administrator. That's her job. And Sorry, Corinne. And the last is honor honor the relationship between you and staff. There's no staff that wants you to look bad. I always wanted to make my elected boards look as good as they could be. I never wanted to take credit for anything. It was all them. They made the decision. I just made the wheels turn behind the scenes. Because the reality is, if I made you look good, then you liked me. And if you liked me, I kept my job. If I did my job well, then there were no issues. So staff really does want to make you look good. Keys for successful partners. We've touched on this a few times. Clearly identify the policy goals, outcomes to be achieved, including back to those personnel plans. You've got to set your expectations in writing, what you have with the staff you define. Staff gets to decide how they bring the outcomes to reality. They're the ones that decide, do I buy from this place? Do I buy from that place? You have to trust them that when they go out and buy light bulbs, they're shopping, they're getting their best price. For you to go back in and say, well, wait a minute, I checked with Costco and they had bulbs for 5 cents cheaper. As many light bulbs we use in a year, we could have saved $50. You're in the weeds. Out of the weeds. You're should we have lights? That's the policy. Okay. Best practices. I like this one because somebody brings in incentives like Pellegrino and coffee. Keep staff and guest speakers happy. Try to keep staff happy. If all they hear is you beating up on staff or criticizing staff, they don't get happy. They don't like coming to work. They don't like being here. Criticize the project or the process or the issue, not the person. Too often we identify the person with the issue, and we don't like the issue, but it doesn't mean you have to like the person. A perfect example, and there's this thing going on with the Supreme Court now. So it's you're on this side or you're on that side, and which side of that issue you're on makes you a good or bad person depending on your individual beliefs. There's a lot more to that person, to every person, than how they believe about one issue. So just because one of your peers takes a position you don't like, don't ostracize yourself from that person. If a citizen comes in and takes a position you don't like, don't ostracize them. They're not your enemy. They're still one of your residents. They're still one of the people you're elected to serve. If staff gives you an opinion you don't like, it's okay. It's just their opinion. Don't hold it against them. They have a lot of other opinions. Some you like, some you won't. Don't ever let staff get drawn into council trustee disagreements. If you got a disagreement between two of you, don't get staff in the middle of it. You can ask for facts or something else, but not who do you think should win? And I know that wouldn't be the question, but just don't draw them into it. That's not their job. Their job is to be apolitical. You're all supposed to be apolitical. Nobody's supposed to really know if you're a D or an R or an L or whatever. They're definitely not supposed to be involved in it. So don't draw them in. And the last point, we talked about this previously, share information equally. If you know it and it's part of your decision process, then everybody should. Treat others with civility, respect, communicate consistently, praise in public, criticize in private. I always think that's good. It does nobody any good to be criticized and open. They harbor bad feelings, and it just creates a wider and wider rift between people. So if you want to say good things, do it in public. You want to say bad things, wait till after the meeting and say it in private. Meetings, we talked about this. John talked about a lot of this. I think the most important things are how you run the meeting, how you control the meeting. I know your city attorney doesn't generally come personally present, but you still have to have someone acting as parliamentarian. I see a lot of your discussions when I watch board meetings. The agenda item is about X. 20 minutes into talking about X, I'm like, what happened to X? We're on like Q. You can't let discussions get off track. The public didn't know you were going to talk about Q. You're talking about X, keep the conversation on X. Don't get off on the weeds. Don't let yourself get distracted. And any board member at any time can call a question, which means end debate. We're done talking. Let's call the question. If you get a second, that's the end of debate. And vote on the issue. So try to keep your agendas on point, moving forward. We've talked about call to the public, how you deal with that. That's really up to you. At the very least, I'd suggest you kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you go through your next few meetings and think about, how would this exchange have been different? You're not cutting anybody off. That's what I hear. Oh, no, you're interfering with our right of speech. No, you're not. You've got your speech. Come up and tell us what you're thinking or what question you have. You still have it. You don't have a right to interject yourself into the legislative process. They're not elected. They elected you to engage in that. They have a right to come up and give you their concerns or raise questions that they don't think have been properly addressed, but then it becomes your job to debate it in the legislative function. Adopt the rules. There you go. I think you do a good job with the chairperson and the mayor. Executive session, I think Sam did a great job of going over that. I'm not going to belabor it. Ethics. Somebody asked a question the other day, and I don't even remember what the question was. My general rule of thumb, if you have to ask somebody if it's ethical or not ethical, don't do it. It's that simple. Because even though there may be a technical answer that says, oh yeah, technically you can do that, the perception will always be that it was unethical. So if you have to ask yourself the question, don't do it. Conflicts of interest, I think you guys are on top of that. I don't worry about it. I don't know if Sam covered Amendment 41 on acceptance of gifts. If he didn't, familiarize yourself or ask your city attorney to review that. It's not uncommon. You guys will get invited to a lunch or to speak at Rotary or something else. Know what the rules are. Know what the rules are. Don't get yourself in trouble. Not to be a paranoid person, but there are those people out there who will try to put you into a situation which could put you in ethical jeopardy. Don't let it happen. Know the rules on gifting. It's one of the most dangerous areas. I can leave you a set of these slides if you want. There are some gifts that are acceptable. So it's not, you can't do anything. You just really, really, really need to know those rules. And you pay your city attorney more than me, so ask him. Code of conduct, this is such a, we really shouldn't have to have rules that tell us how to behave relative to each other. We shouldn't have to do that individually. We shouldn't have to do it as a society. But more so in government we do than even in society. We need to set rules on how the public gets to interact with us, how we get to interact with each other, and how staff gets to interact. Please review those rules that you have. I can tell you you're not following them. At the very least, either change them or follow them, but don't have rules that you don't follow. And remember, you represent the town everywhere, all the time. You go to shop in Delta, you're not shopping as Paige Smith. You're shopping as Paige Smith, the trustee for Pamela. So you can never let down your guard. You can never, get in that argument with somebody over a parking spot in the parking lot, or they grabbed the last zucchini that you wanted out of the produce aisle. You can't do it. You represent the city now. Liability, we talked about. Scope of employment. It's really kind of that simple. It's almost like the ethics. If you think, should I be doing this? Don't. If you think, should I be doing this? Don't. What I can tell you is if you have an issue, The mayor and your town administrator are responsible for putting the agenda together. If there's an issue you want to discuss about how something should or shouldn't happen, just ask the mayor, hey, can we put a discussion item on the agenda next time? Because I'm unclear as to what this is. And ultimately, it's up to her, but at least in my experience to date, she's been fairly amicable. This talks about all your liability stuff outside of your personal liability. The municipality can be on the hook for, and things that need to be priorities. Dangerous streets, dangerous building, gas leaks, water leaks. I don't think you have a hospital or a jail. Your public facilities, dangerous trees and parks. So many ways for a town to get sued. And towns, cities, governments, and big corporations, those are the favorite targets of litigious people. So you always want to be careful, and those should always be priorities. Other topics of interest in the policies, personnel relations we've talked about, the organizational structure, you've got 18 people, it's very complicated. Emergency preparedness. How many of you have read your town's continuity of operations plan? That's usually the response. The what? You need to have in your town two things: an emergency response plan and a continuity of operations plan. What happens if there's a gas leak under City Hall? How does the town continue to function? What happens if a fire comes roaring down that mountain? What happens if there's a flood and the North Fork cuts off the bridges? Those are continuity of operations. How do you keep things going? You should all know who are the points of contact. Who's your regional Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management contact? What's your role in an emergency? Who responds to emergencies? Do you know?
Well, starts with the police.
Emergency services coordinator.
For the county. County has primary emergency response responsibilities for your area. But you should know who that emergency manager is. It's another reason, on top of it. You should know who the county commissioners are. Where's the county EOC? Anybody know where the county EOC is? I was gonna say you're ahead of me. If you do, I'm not quite sure. But they've got one, and I'm sure they have a mobile one as well. How does that run? What are your roles? What are your responsibilities? What is your authority in an emergency? What's the town administrator's authority in an emergency? How does that authority kick in? If this building blows up, natural gas leak, we're only going to attribute it to terrorists, just blows up and there's a fire down Main Street. What's your town administrator's level of authority for spending? That's part of an emergency response policy. Okay, usually, generally speaking, there's a policy that says the town administrator under emergency circumstances can spend up to this without any board approval, but has to come back to the board within so many days and get an emergency declared. Anyhow, there's policies. We have libraries of policies that we can send as templates, help you draft those things and get them done. Again, quick refresher, what's the biggest challenge you have in getting this all done?
Staff time.
Staff capacity. You got 18 people to get everything done, and now to also respond to all the citizens that are going to come complain to her. It's a tough job. Every one of them has a tough job. But these are things that, as you identify that are lacking, you can put into long-range plans. You can say, okay, we need a coop. Let's set a reasonable time. Let's talk to the county emergency manager or the Department of Homeland Security emergency manager. It's a mouthful, DHSEM, about them coming down and helping us. They have grants. Some people don't want their grants because they come with too many ties, but explore it. You can get the help. You're not on your own. There are people who will help you do these things.
And I believe when we had our water crisis down in 2019, we created an emergency response plan and a continuity of operations plan as part of that whole thing in the wrap up. Now,
COOP plan and emergency response should be updated every 2 years.
I need to update.
It's much more than mean, how many of you were thinking about a fire raging through your town and burning the entire town to the ground 2 years ago? It wasn't, it's not gonna happen. And then we get the Marshall Fire, when there's 1,000 homes in a few hours, and the whole world of fire mitigation changes. So emergency preparedness is huge. And I would suggest that in a town your size, I think the board has a slightly larger role than in other towns, because you've only got 18 staff. Okay, audit law. The biggest thing I can say about audit law, you have an annual audit requirement. And all of those grants and funding opportunities I talked about, they go bye-bye if you don't file your audit. You don't get money from the state if you don't have audits filed. So is that this time of year?
Yep.
So this time of year, that's the priority. Got to get the audits done. Election law, hopefully all of you as candidates went through the election law training. Budget law, we will go into some of that when we do our budgeting session. Board training opportunities, conferences. One of the key bad choices a governing body can make in times of fiscal constraints is to eliminate training, particularly professional training. CML is coming up with a conference in Breckenridge, June. It ends the Friday before I come back to strategic planning. Incredible presentations, things about the new funding stuff coming, how the emergency preparedness, opportunity to network with your peers. You cannot not do that. You have got to keep in your budget those kind of opportunities, even if it's only once a year, even if it's only one person. I don't think it should be one person. It should be 2 to 3 of you at least once a year. But hopefully going to different trainings. And one thing that I've seen very successfully done is one board member will go to one training, another board member will go to another, and then you report back at the next board meeting about the things you've learned in the context. So you share that with the board. So it's not as good as everybody going, but at least you get to share the information. So I encourage you not to cut out those trainings, particularly for the electeds. They're very important. We need to keep that network going. And that's not to minimize staff professional training, because that's equally important. And I think the big one for town administrators is CCMA. Compensation limits, you don't worry about. Land use planning. Do you all get land use planning training? Okay, we'll put that on the horizon. Legal issues, hopefully, you don't say yes, no, don't put how many fingers up, but you know how many lawsuits are pending against the city. And you know the basic nature of them, and know that those are confidential and the attorneys work it out. These are John Nabel-Danian was a guy, and I took this off somebody else's slide. I didn't want to not give him credit, so I left his name on there. But he's an attorney who ended up being a federal judge. And he said, hey, these are 3 things that he saw as common among effective councils and boards: ability to deal with issues as a team, willingness to address difficult issues. You can't dodge them, they're still going to be there. So you got to address them. And having a successful relationship with professional staff. Oh my God, I got through it.
It's 7:38.
Hey, that's a lot of talking, really.
Questions. I really want this to be more interactive. So please ask any and all questions.
I just have a question. You mentioned land use training. Is that something DOLA does?
DOLA can do land use training.
Okay.
You have my card. Send me a reminder. Hey, can you help us coordinate land use training? Be happy to do that. And that can be a combination between the Board of Trustees and your planning commission,
Ah, that would be,
or Board of Adjustment, whatever you have.
yeah.
Both.
You can do both.
Both.
You can
So
do
it's
joint.
great to get all of them.
Yeah.
All of us doing it. Okay.
Other questions? I know I didn't. You got questions. I can see it. You want to know how much I was paying for the Pellegrini?
No. So there's a difference between the benefit of the doubt and having rose-colored glasses. And I'd like to hear you talk about that. There's some context. I feel that it's very important to support staff. It's very important to not do dirty laundry in public. I get that. But it's also important to see it as it is and to hold people accountable. And that's the dynamic that is very difficult.
So, you know, you guys are good on open meetings as long as there's not two or more of you together, right? Or more than two of you.
It's three.
So more than two of you. So two of you can get together.
Well, no, I thought it was only two, but it is.
It is definitely
Sam Light said three.
Yeah, so two people can get together,
Right.
three cannot.
three.
No, he made it sound like three can
No.
in a municipality.
That's not saying.
And that's why I asked that question of Sam Light.
No.
You did not say three.
Okay.
I was kind of confused on that as
It
well.
was not three.
Stay with two.
Okay, which is how I've always
He's saying-
thought. So when he said that, I thought, wait a minute,
Now,
because it's two for state government. But it's not three for municipalities, because I thought there's a difference.
I'm
in
not giving you
statute.
legal advice.
Well, in the statute, I still stuck with two, but the way he said it, anyway,
Yeah, you're right.
I
I
heard,
think it's really confusing, so we should probably get that
I
clarified.
heard the same thing you heard.
Okay,
And much like I talk about ethics and I talk about should you communicate with staff or not communicate with staff, you're safe with two.
that's how I've always felt. That's how I've always, yeah.
Don't push it on.
Three get together and they decide they're gonna do a certain thing. That's half the board right there.
Yeah.
Throws it in the mayor's court. So that's where I think we're in trouble. When you start getting three together.
Yeah, which is, again, I was shocked when he said that, I have to be honest, so, but you use two.
Yeah.
Clearly it's
rule of thumb-
two, and we're not gonna go outside of that.
And
Yeah.
I would, before I get back to your question, Trustee Knudsen, through you, Mayor. I would go further. There's a thing called polling. John, did Sam talk about that?
Or sequential meetings.
Sequential meetings or polling. So I can't go to you and have a meeting and say, hey, what do you think about this? Okay, I got that vote. And I go to you and, okay, I got that vote. Can't do it. So back to your question, Trustee Knudsen. To me, the benefit of the doubt is somebody didn't do something once and they have what seems like a reasonable justification, and sometimes not even justification. You know, it's just, you know, hey, did you get this to us? No, I didn't. I'll get it to you next week. Done. Okay, thanks. Next week comes or you ask for it another time. Again, it doesn't come. At that point, my benefit of the doubt, you know, like preponderance versus beyond, I'm starting to have more doubts. And I can't give you a formula, but when I can say when that level of doubt gets to the point of concern about performance, and it should be performance that was laid out clearly in that performance plan, I'm going to get with the mayor and say, Mayor, can we go talk to whoever you have the concern about? And the two of you can go talk to that staff person. Or you can just talk to the mayor, however you want to do it. But then you kind of back up. Okay, now the mayor's going to address it, or you addressed it with the individual. Hopefully it gets done. If it doesn't get done, now there's not only your level of doubt, there's another level of doubt. And hopefully the expectations were set clearly in that meeting between you, the mayor, and the individual, to the point that, you know, there was no doubt. And one of my favorite practices when I'm asking somebody to get something done is I don't give them a deadline. I let them tell me when it's going to be done. If I give you a deadline, it's easy for you to say, well, that wasn't reasonable. You tell me when you're going to have it done. You picked the deadline. You could have picked a week from then. You could have picked a month from then. As long as it was reasonable, I didn't care. But deliver when you say you're going to deliver. So in terms of that benefit of the doubt versus rose-colored glasses, never want anybody to have rose-colored glasses. Rose-colored glasses generally means you have an implicit bias in favor of the person versus somebody over here, you don't have the rose-colored glasses, you have an implicit bias against the person for whatever reason, hair color, height, whatever. So that would be my suggestion. Other questions? Trustee Valentine, you've been very quiet all night.
This is very informative.
Okay.
I'm new to this.
Well, I hope above all it was helpful. I look forward to hopefully, actually, I have mixed feelings. I'm going to tell you a secret. I don't want any sympathy. But today is my wife's birthday.
Oh, gosh, you're in trouble.
She's spending it alone in Grand Junction
Oh, man.
while I'm down with you guys.
You need to get back.
But I will tell you, she's very understanding that I have a very important job. Working with boards. I want your town to succeed. For you to succeed, you have to have a good board, you have to have a good staff, and the two need to work together well. If you get that and you have a positive, controlled relationship in your board meetings with the public, where you set the expectation and enforce the expectations, you're going to have a well-run town. And the well-run town is very, very important because people see, people hear, they see what's in the newspaper, and it creates an impression. It creates an impression on your county. And they draw implicit biases against or for you based on how they think you're behaving and operating as a town. It creates implicit biases for or against you at the state level based on how you're performing in public environments, how your reports are coming in, how your grants are written. That's all people see. They don't know you as an individual. They don't know what brought you to this point. They only know how you act as a group and how you run your town. And it's important. I hope you'll relay these things I say to the other people who are on the board. I don't know them. I don't think I've met any of them. I don't know what their positions or point of views are.
This is available for
Yeah.
them to watch.
And I get to see the back of my head, I guess.
Yeah. And can we get all those slides in electronic format?
She has them in electronic.
Okay, then, yeah, if we could send out, that would be really
That'd
good.
be good.
I guess, I'm sorry.
I have to go. I'm really sorry.
So hopefully I get to see you all on June 25th,
Yep.
Saturday, with a bunch of your residents, and we'll start doing some strategic planning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dana.
Thanks.
Pleasure meeting. Thank you.
Safe travels.
Thank you very much.
Watch for the deer,